Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who can throw tantrums, damage property, start fights, and eventually lose his mind.
Tim Longo. Wow,
if you're not kept happy, those are things that can happen to you. That's what I've heard anyway. I was also thinking about, needing alcohol to get through each day, but that's a totally separate thing. We are starting a new series this week, and I don't know. We'll have to talk about how we didn't start it last week as well. But you want to introduce our game?
Yeah, we are playing Dwarf Fortress, which I don't remember if I told you. I think I told you, but shout out to Artemis, who's one of our listeners and Discord folks, as he was the one to suggest it.
Yes.
Quite a ways back, actually, and it. I think it also sort of a bit sparked the conversation, or I don't know if it necessarily was the seed that was planted for you on sort of the whole text series that or framework that we're doing. We have a bunch of different text games, and we played Rogue, of course, and Text Adventure and stuff. But anyway, yeah, so it goes back a couple months actually, and in coinciding with the Steam launch, which has been so successful for Bay 12, I think that's the name of their company.
Bay 12, yes, Bay 12 Games.
Yeah, it's been very successful for them, and it's just as, yeah, so we're playing right now, though. We chose to go back to, did you end up playing the 2006 original?
I did.
Okay.
I went to the original release, the .21.
Yeah, me as
.21 something release. So,
and I remember when this came out, and it was just as confounding then, and I think to both of us, I think we both tried it, and it sounds like you tried it maybe a couple times, but so we wanted to, even though the Steam version has come out, and maybe we get far enough to do a version of an episode on that one, we did want to see sort of the origin and where it all kind of began, and it's become a bit of an infamous game in so many ways. The development process, how is it one of the earliest early access games, you could kind of say, and it's building over time. It's just two brothers, I believe, who've worked on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Zach and Tarn Adams.
Yeah.
Tarn Adams, I believe, does all the programming, and the two of them co-design it. So.
Okay. Yeah. And so it's just a very unique, especially going back to 2006, which it sounds like they were working on it well before that. 2002, I think you said, was maybe the beginning of the development of it. So it's it's just and it's a full ASCII. I assume that's the right term in this case. Full ASCII presented.
It's not, but that's okay. We'll get there.
Okay, great. All right, good. It's text presented in text, at least the version we're playing. So it's all it's all icons on the screen kind of thing. Yeah. So we have started. But yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about, well, I don't know, do we want to jump into our usual setting the stage of 2006, which we chose as its sort of semi-unofficial / official launch date? Games of that year.
Well, I'll first confirm that yes, it was the suggestion from Artemis that made. I mean, we were going to do this first. We were just going to jump right in, and I said, well, maybe we should do a couple other things first, and then that kind of got me thinking about it. It gave me the opportunity to go back to Rogue, which I'd played it a little bit, but games like it in the past, and thought it was worth looking at that. It's not accurate to say it's ASCII because there are no like little dwarf faces in the ASCII character set. It's more accurate, I guess, to say it's glyph based, right? It's and on a grid as characters appear typically in ASCII. ASCII is the format, which is the 256 character format. And there's well more than 256. Well, I don't know if there's more than 256 characters represented, but there are definitely glyphs that are not in the standard character set. So
Got it.
The dwarves in particular. So, but they are represented. You know, it looks like it's an ASCII game. It's close enough for government work. For sure. You know, I don't know how they render it. I know later they moved to a specific rendering library and things like that. That, you know, they're not just rendering text on the screen. They're doing something a little bit different. But it does present that way, and I think it's reasonable to think of it that way. So, let's talk about 2006 a little bit. You know, it's the year of the Wii, so we've got that going on. It's also the year after, you know, the Xbox 360 came out. You know, so you've got a lot of games kind of in that probably come to mind when you think of those systems. The PS3 would also have come out, I believe, in 2006, although I don't. In my list, didn't come up with a lot of games that I was like, oh yeah, that's a you know, PS3 game or something like that. So you've got your Gears of War, your Legends of Zelda's Twilight Princess, New Super Mario Brothers as kind of all launch window titles. But, you know, from RPGs, you've got The Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. You've got Final Fantasy 12. I think you had some others as well. You're also a fan of Dead Rising, as has come up before on the cast. There are also some late era PS2 titles that were still coming out. And in fact, I think Final Fantasy 12 would fit that bill. Is my recollection. That's what I played it on. I think maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, no. Well, it's listed here.
That's a PS.
Too.
Okay, yeah, I can't remember what I played it on. I think because I also have it on the PS4. So I guess it's 2 and 4, that remake or remaster. Okami came out this year as well. That's a great late PS2 title, etc. So those are some of the things that are out. Which is to say, nothing remotely like this game.
No.
You know, I dug deep looking for simulation games coming out this year. I think you came up with one or two, but I couldn't really think of any big titles.
Yeah, Zoo Tycoon, Thrillville. It's actually like expansions to Zoo Tycoon 2. Looks like series of them. Yeah, Thrillville, but you know they're sort of simulation / building game. I mean, they are, but a different style for sure. But like I was trying to see, yeah, Civilization 4 had an expansion. What was the other one that I'm missing now? But yeah, and there's some Sims 2 expansions and stuff. So Sims is still, you know, pretty popular at that point. But yeah, but nothing. I don't, you know, what do we even equate it to?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, honestly, The Sims is probably the closest thing, right? Because you've got a bunch of individuals who you can't directly impact, and you're kind of setting up their environment, but they're driven. I mean, The Sims, you know, system of needs is a lot slimmer than the dwarves are, which is a whole, yeah. I will be plumbing those depths for a while, as it were. So in terms of other games that we've played that kind of are close to this, Tim brought up in pre-show Populous, which was a great pull. That one didn't occur to me, but of course also SimCity and Civilization are different sort of flavors of this. You know, Civ is sort of more direct. SimCity and Populous are really good, and Populous in particular is like at the level of individuals, so it feels sort of the closest of the games that we've played for the cast to this. Although the presentation couldn't be more, I don't know, it probably could be more different, but you know, it's pretty different. And of course, what you're able to do in Populous is very different. So you're kind of doing actions on a different kind of scale. So.
Yeah. I mean, the difference between what you have control over in this game versus a game like Populous, which was, I don't remember that was 2000, was late 90s?
No, 89, I want to say.
Oh, that was 89. Okay, yeah. So so
something along those lines.
Much earlier, and still figuring out what, you know, was a genre. There weren't many games like it at the time, so you can obviously see so many years later them, but giving the player many more options. But I mean, I don't know. Constraints are obviously an important part of any development like this, and when you have one programmer and two designers, you can
Yeah.
you can see how they chose to do things in certain ways. If they wanted to make a Dwarf Fortress simulator, they're going to make decisions to do that. So give themselves flexibility by building it in a certain way. Yeah, yeah. So it's fascinating to have it come out in 2006 is kind of even more fascinating because I remember it being a bit of a baffling launch in a way, or just discovery because you have Gears of War come out the same year, and obviously people are talking about a game like that for specifically obvious reasons. You have new
Right.
platforms coming out, etc., and then this comes out, and it's indie games weren't necessarily a huge thing at the time, and so there's this small development team doing something that looks like like a Rogue or something like that. That's a throwback. Very baffling. And I think a lot of people, including myself, and it sounds like you, we didn't know what to do with it. Not just how to play it, but like how do you categorize it? What bucket do you put it in? And yeah, and then we'll talk about the opacity of it. But you should talk about, if you're ready to, last week.
If I'm over the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So last week we hopped on the horn. Tim's on the road and was mindful of his time, and I kind of tried to use the time. I didn't have a lot of time myself. We're very busy right now, and I could not even figure out where the ocean was to dip my oar in on this game last week. And I will say, I downloaded the very original, and I downloaded one that was maybe 6 years later, which is probably the one I originally tried, because I do remember trying this after Skyrim came out. And I remember thinking, well, I should give this a try. I think I tried Minecraft around the same time. Like, oh, here's some games that are kind of out there doing different things. And back then I dug into it. I ran through the generation, got into the game, and went, okay, I don't know what to do, and it promptly uninstalled it. Then this time I went, and I guess there's a stage where you get to in that later 2012 version, like you can customize your dwarves, the starting party that you have of 7 dwarves. And I think I backed out of that, being like, oh, don't bother with that. And instead I got a bunch of dwarves with like no skills, like they had no preferential thing, or maybe you have to set them up more in a later version. Like, I don't know. I haven't gone back to that save, but I spent like just an hour trying to figure out what to do with these, little glyphs. And I had finally, towards the end of that, found the in-game help and was like trying to read through that, but I was nowhere near a mountain for one thing. So they had no place to dig. Like because I picked things based on like my own preferences. Like, well, I don't want to be in a place that's hot or scorching. Let me go find some place that's temperate. Turns out that was like a forest or something. There was no place for them to dig. I mean, it was a mess. And starting again with the sim I actually ended up playing a few hours of was a lot easier in some ways, because there was a huge cliff face right there, and there was a river. It was sort of felt a little bit, well, I wouldn't say friendly, but at least a little less off-putting. Like, oh, clearly that's the place to dig, right? So there was some help there, which was nice. And I don't know if that's because this older version of the game just kind of always starts you on something like that, or what. I was surprised that I was able to make such a blunder of my of my first game to literally not know what to do at all, because I didn't have the defining feature of dwarves, which was like a place for them to dig. It's possible I could have, and like I said, I may have to go back to that and see. But I was to the point of like, I don't know if we can talk about this game because I can't even start it. That's how badly I bounced off. So
well,
you had a lot more luck the first time out.
Well, I did. I mean, I did and I didn't. I mean, I think yes, I did ultimately because I played two games in quick succession. And the first game I think was similar to your situation. I had only peasants, and I think I was near a cliff face, but I didn't realize I was. But it was something didn't feel right. I couldn't get them to do anything. I didn't know how to assign jobs or something like that. So then I somewhat accidentally, started a new game, or not really like with the intention of like, doing the loadouts differently. But then I, was able to do the I guess there's sort of an automated loadout option there that, and like you said, it places you in a pretty convenient place as well. So once I got that, but I mean, like one of the notes I wrote down that's, snarky and jokey is that I feel like, so I don't know, I've still only maybe put in between 3 and 4 hours. I might be over 4, but it doesn't feel like it because I feel like most of my time is really, it's like the game about playing the game, if that makes sense. It's like I'm playing a game where I'm trying to learn how to play a game. It's like I'm not actually playing the game right now. I'm just trying to delve into its, like we talked about in our pre-show, its opacity and its how befuddling it is and what everything does. And really it's sort of like this exploring of a game. It's exploring of not exploring the world, but exploring the game. It's like, what does this do? And what does this do? And what does that mean? And so I'm kind of like gaining that knowledge that we always talk about. But I have started, I have started my Dwarf Fortress and I'm starting to build things. I had some good actually breakthroughs this morning before we started recording on some things that I couldn't figure out and I finally did. So we can talk about those later. But I think it's really funny and worth talking about. I don't think I'm pretty positive we've never had to cancel a recording session because we didn't know what to talk about. Because
I didn't even know how to start. I mean, that was the problem. I had nothing. It would have been unfair to discuss it at that point because all I had was frustration, and I know that this is a game that has a devoted following, right? They've kept this, their audience has kept this thing going for years and giving them enough to live off of to do this. I do remember, and it might have been this might have been the trigger for me trying it, was there was a point at which they were able to, or at least Tarn Adams, I think, was able to go full time on it. And like, this was going to be his job, that they had finally were having enough regular donations basically, because it was all just on their website. They had made a few small games before this that were like, oh, we spent a month on a game or 2 months on a game. But this is one where they spent 4 years before they even put it up, ish, who knows if it was 3.5 or whatever. But, they spent all this time building up this simulation engine that they just, I guess, were enjoying, playing. I haven't done any research on the backstory of that, but they didn't put it out there for their existing fans to take a look at until then. And then I just steadily just kind of grew over years and years. I have had a lot more luck, after talking to you last week and you were describing your experience thus far. And I was like, this was not my experience was nothing like this, because I had, 7 peasants that had no apparent skills, because they had nowhere to dig, etc. I mean, again, those things might be possible, but I didn't, I did not invest enough time to find out. I did actually try to leave it running overnight as well, but I think at some point it auto paused for some reason, maybe because my screen went dark or my machine, went into the pause mode or something. But because I just wanted to see what would happen, if I just left it on, which is often a fun thing to do with a simulation anyway. But yeah, so I did. I bounced off horrendously, to the point of just like, I have nothing to say because I didn't even play the game. But at least this week, with some chatter with you last week, that really helped ground me, and also, I just dug in way more into the in-game help. Like I had read a couple of things. I was like, okay, that's enough to get started. Yeah. And just had, I just read pages on pages and took some notes just on the pages of things I was reading. Like, oh, in order to do this, I'm going to need these things. In order to do that, I'm going to need these things. And just like made little diagrams of myself of like, this is the tech tree for whatever, charcoal. What do I need charcoal for? Et cetera, and just those sorts of things. So there's a lot here. And I'm already a little worried that I'm not going to have enough of certain types of resources to really grow my fortress, but that's a longer term problem. As the game says in its documentation, losing is fun, failure's fun, which is, sort of gives you an idea of what the designers expect to happen with this game. Like, this is not going to go well for a while, and I think they even say that in their documentation. Like, you're gonna fail a lot for a while until you get your head around this. So it's okay. Just keep trying. Which is so different from the games we described from this year that it's like another world. It's like a different evolutionary path for games. And as I sort of talked about with text adventures and has come up as well with Rogue, like if you keep going in the direction of those games, you end up with things like this, right? Things that are just very different from the mainstream. And that's, again, sort of why we're spending a little time on, text as a little mini series here at the beginning of the year.
Were there? I'm gonna share a couple of my surprises, but I'll ask you the question, and then I'll answer it first, and you can think about it. But the question being, what are some of the things that have surprised you as you started playing? And so think about that. But I'm gonna jump in with a couple of mine.
Think about that.
One, you actually mentioned this, I think, before we started. Or maybe it was in the ghost episode that we didn't record, but the building, the creating of the world process, I found fascinating. In that there is when you start the game. Well, first of all, to go back a little bit even further than that, there's an opening cutscene to the game and music in the game, and actually. Not the music's pretty good. I mean, I think it really sets the mood well, and I didn't actually expect any of that to be there. But they have, I guess I'll say glyph-based cinematic that they sort of show dwarves mining, and it's all in that same aesthetic. But just I either forgot about that or didn't see it in the old days or whatever. But it's just such an interesting thing that they even attempted to do that. And then the creating of the world, once you start and generate your first world, I don't know why it was so interesting to me, but it's just, you see, I guess, I don't know if you call it a log or whatever, but you almost kind of see the process happening. And if you really are watching it and pay attention, it's just so fascinating to me to see sort of like the math, the numbers being crunched or whatever, and having sort of the world being built, and it sort of reinforces the seed mentality from these games, or like a Minecraft or something where it is generated from a bunch of random numbers or what have you, or algorithms, I guess, or whatever the best way to say that is. So it gives you that. So that was one another surprising thing. Music was surprising, kind of an opening aesthetic. The other one is how, I won't necessarily call it lore, but I will call it sort of like fictional grounding. Like, yes, you're playing a game about dwarves, but, there's like titles like The Age of Myth and Legends comes up, and the names of the dwarves are very, I feel like dwarven, I guess I'll say, and there's not a
Yeah.
story, of course, but they did spend enough time for me in this, at least in the context of the aesthetics of the game, to kind of remind me aesthetically that this is a game about dwarves, so which is what you want. It's called Dwarf Fortress. You want it to feel, like ale is important to dwarves, and so that's a thing, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just, I think I was thinking it was going to be just way more abstract, and just symbols running around and a simulation happening, but they've actually done more with it than to give it sort of its own identity, than I realized. And then there's others, but what are any come to mind for you as you're getting into things?
Yes, I think I think the biggest surprise for me was how much there is to a dwarf. Because I was also, I remembered the generation thing, and in fact, one thing that was kind of surprising was with a 2022 computer, how much faster the 2006 world generation runs. Because I remember that taking more than 10 minutes originally. Like I want to say closer to 20, like when I played it 10 years ago. So that makes sense. Now it's a few minutes. We've had several iterations of Moore's law, so it makes sense it would be a lot faster, but I wasn't expecting it to be that, like it wasn't that long that I was waiting. And I do remember it literally being 10 minutes. It feels like an underestimate, probably more like 20 back when I originally tried this. So that was just a nice surprise. But the depth of the dwarves is really impressive to me, because I was looking at, their jobs or whatever, and like, wow, they can do a lot of different stuff. And then later on, I was like, well, how do I make them do like I built a still because they all need to drink. So I'm like, well, none of them, how do I develop that skill? Like, it's not on this list. And then I was in looking at that list, and I hit the asterisk key, and there's another dozen things that they can do. And then I hit it again, and there's another dozen things they can do. And I was like, oh no, like,
yeah,
not only, I mean, it's not just these things, right? This sort of handful of things on the first page. There's another couple dozen things that they can do that can be their skills. And that I just, I had been seeing, like, you get a description of them and they're like, this dwarf likes, lizard leather and this kind of food, and they absolutely hate cave spiders. And like, there's all this like description on any one of them. So they all have like all these chosen from apparently very large lists of things, because they're all different. Things that they like to do and whatever. I'm happy I have one who just loves mining. That is my ecstatic dwarf. I have one dwarf who is literally ecstatic all the time, because they're constantly mining and they love it, and it's great. So I don't know, that sort of depth of things that could possibly make them happy was there. And then because one of the things that they all can do, I guess by default, but isn't on that first page, or most of them, is like furniture hauling, which is really funny, because of you when I finally figured out how to build things, which is a whole nother step.
Yeah.
And I was planning out making rooms for everybody. Like I've been actually pretty methodical with how I'm building the space. And I've kind of got longer term plans on how the fortress will actually develop. But the initial step of like, well, I need to have everybody have a bedroom, because it talks about that being important to them. And you will see, like, if you look at their psychology, they'll be like, oh, they recently, slept in the mud, right? Or whatever, because they'll just sleep wherever until you build them bedrooms. So like that depth, it's just really, really impressively deep, even in this very first stage, which is, it's remarkable how much is there already. And that has just been endlessly surprising, because, some of the menus, are, of things to build. You're like, build a container. And then it's like, oh, you have different types of containers you can build, or whatever. So there's also some weird taxonomies, and it's, I don't know, it's just very surprising often. Like I was definitely at a point where I'm like, okay, well, I don't know like I've had them cut down some trees and they're doing some mining, but like they're just leaving the rocks and the wood where they, where they mine or where they cut trees or where they cut down flowers or whatever. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on there. And it turns out you need to build an area to store that stuff, and they'll just bring it there.
Yeah, stockpiles. Yeah.
So it's just everything is more is deeper than I thought. I didn't realize I needed to give orders to the buildings, like, oh hey, you're a you're a woodworking workshop. I have to tell you to build tables and chairs and beds and things like that. So it's just been depth upon depth upon depth in every fragment of the game, and I'm constantly discovering things like, okay, and it's usually because I've run up against not knowing why they're not doing something, and then having to go figure out, well, how do I make that happen? So that's been like the workshops, and like, they really want to drink from wells. They don't want to drink from the river. They do it, but they don't want to. How do I make a well? Okay, I go to the well and it says, oh, you need stone blocks and a bucket. And I'm like, okay. And that's how I discover how to do things. Like, yeah. I know things from the manual that they like that will make them happier. And then I have to figure out in the interface how to make that thing happen. So like you said, I'm more playing the game now after several hours than I was when I started, but I definitely have spent a lot of time figuring out how to play the game.
Yeah, the depth of the dwarves, and I mean, to your point, like there's menus upon menus, like submenus and submenus of many things. The dwarf depth is another good one. Like you mentioned the thoughts, like you can go and read about their thoughts and preferences, I think they call it, and it relates to things that are, that's, I guess, your progress. For instance, like you said, they'll sleep, such and such, it doesn't want to sleep in the grass anymore, or is looking for a well, or wants a seat. It's a simple thing as really or no, I think it said she likes seats. It's like, of course she likes seats. Yeah. But so I was amazed that they have that running, but then also they have an inventory. They have slots in their inventory for what they're wearing. There's wounds for each. I mean, it's probably 8 to 10 different positions on their body. So it's like, and then the animals have the same thing. Like a cat's tail has a slot for if it's wounded or not.
Right.
And I just like managing this at scale in this way terrifies me because, obviously the GUI's not great because it's, it's all basically keyboard hotkeys and there's no mouse control or something like that. Well, so it's just like, it's sort of, I guess, I would assume that the fan following for these early versions really are, really it becomes about that sort of like memorization and quick keyboard usage, right? That makes you the most efficient Dwarf Fortress builder because you're just memorizing what button does what when, what key does what when. And I think the depth, I think the fact that, that there's sort of like, there's more, what do I want to say, logic or structure to how things are built, and you gave the example of the well, but just like the concept that you have to stockpile before they will utilize things. At least that's how it worked for me. And then each workshop has its different menus of things that it can do, and that there's just kind of these layers of order of operations, which is, I guess, the bread and butter of a building sim game like that. But it's sort of like we talk about this from time to time where we play games where it feels like there was just a lot of yeses happening during development rather than no's.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really feels like, they just didn't stop. Like they didn't give themselves too many limitations. They're like, well, what are we going to do about inventory? Well, we want them to have inventory, right? Okay, well, how deep is inventory going to be? Well, we might as well do every slot on their body. Oh, okay. Jeez, really? You
Well, in
know,
that
and
case, we're going to need things for every slot in their body, and they're going to, what are the rules for doing that? And you just like you see it expand out forever. Like it's an infinitely branching tree at that point. Every time you add a level of depth, you're just making the options for that depth broader and broader. And of course, it's multiplicative because it's we don't just have trees; we have different types of trees, and
yeah,
and so you can make a cedar chair versus a pine chair. Like, is there a difference to those functionally? Like, I don't know. Like, if I made a weapon out of pine versus cedar, would the cedar one be stronger? Maybe.
wow,
I haven't really delved into weapons or anything like that, but you get that sort of like. I mean, I've got like 6 different kinds of rock I've found already, as well as silver.
yeah.
But I can't do anything with silver because I didn't until when I finished was basically when I got the anvil. I said, okay, well that's going to be my stopping point because that's a good kind of natural break. It's like, oh, I got my first anvil, so I can make a forge. But then I don't know what I'm going to forge, so we'll see. All my
Well,
buildings are outdoors right now as well, so I'm a little scared about that. I don't know if that's what I'm going to want to have happen. We'll see how
oh,
things go.
wait. So you mean like your workshops and stuff are outside?
Yes, I
Okay,
have them
okay,
outside. Yeah,
okay.
outside the front gates.
I didn't even think to. The funny thing is, I didn't even think to do that. I just I put them all in the mountain. Um, so interesting. Yeah, I guess it makes sense that you can put them wherever you want. Um, yeah, so I think I'm in a jungle because I don't my a jungle is outside my cliff. Because I don't ever remember how to say it, but acacia trees, is it acacia?
Acacia, yeah,
Acacia, yeah.
it's
Um,
acacia. Yeah,
that's a jungle tree, right? Or more of a
it is definitely not a. It's not a pine forest tree, that's for
yeah.
sure. So yes,
So I had different things going on there, and
interesting. Yeah,
so right outside the other funny thing is sometimes my brain just kind of you know works out on things like this. But for the longest time in the very beginning of the game, when they said that when I was kind of exploring what each what I was looking at on the map, and it said that this was a cliff, I didn't. I don't know if they even said cliff face when they describe it. They might, and I just didn't put two and two together. But I thought for the longest time that was a cliff that went down rather than up,
oh,
and so I didn't even think. I didn't even think to dig into it until I realized that was the case. So it's just sort of like because it's black, and it kind of looked
right.
inverted to me or negative space. So it's just funny how your brain does different things. But yeah, I mean, I think like for instance, I have a jeweler as one of my initial 7, and she's not really happy right now, and I have no reason um, to. I found silver, and I haven't gotten to the point where we can do much with it. But I built a jeweler's workshop just to try to make her happy because
Hmm.
she has nothing to do, and she's super sad, and so I don't know when I'll get to use it. But it's just funny how like you said earlier, the motivations and preferences for them drive you to make decisions on what you're building as
Right.
well as just the basics.
Although I do also, I do also change their jobs all the time. Like, so that person who's a jeweler could also be a person who dresses stone or a miner or whatever. I've been going in and just turning those things on and off as I feel like it, as if I feel like I need more mining or need more whatever. So
Yeah,
they
I
may not
haven't
be
been doing
happy
that.
as a
Yeah,
as
I
a
need.
jeweler right now. So you maybe make worth doing.
Yeah, I should do that for sure. Then I haven't delved into that too much, or maybe even found how to do it. The other thing to your point about like the depth and the sort of infinitely branching trees, there's a lot of stuff that seems in the instructions and the items you can build, etc. There seems to be a lot of things related to defense. Obviously, it's a fortress, and so they
Hmm.
talk about fortifications, they talk about siege weapons, and all sorts of different things. And so I'm thinking to myself, wow, what is that going to be like? Who's coming for us? Who's going to attack?
Right. Right.
Just kind of like fascinating that obviously that I would hope that would be balanced to be more mid to late game, but it's just interesting to think, okay, yeah, I got to think about that at some point.
My suspicion is it's going to be balanced by, there's other stuff too. We'll get to this in a minute, but I suspect it's going to be balanced by what you start to output. Because let's say you get your smelter and forge and whatever up and going, and you start doing stuff with gold. That's going to bring the enemies, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to be the thing, that's going to make people interested in you because now you've got wealth. Because apparently you're also, part of the goal is to attract other dwarves. That's why you want your dwarves to be happy, because if you have a happy mountain full of dwarves, more dwarves will come, right? So there's also that. There's also, I dug in somewhere, and there's roles, and you can have a king once you have a certain number of dukes and other things. Wow. And you can have a duke once you have such and such, and you can have this when you have 100 dwarves, and you can have that when you have 80 dwarves. It's just like there's all of that as well that I'm going to be figuring out. Right now, I'm just sort of like, I've made some rooms at the beginning. I'm like, okay, these bedrooms will work for now, but later I'm going to want to decommission them and make them storerooms, and I don't know, maybe a trading post or maybe a barracks or, someday, because I've actually been making the rooms kind of, I don't know, they feel kind of big for just one dwarf, I don't know. It's so absurd that I'm thinking these terms. Like, I've put a couple wells near the front. I'm already thinking, well, how am I going to defend all of this? I've made some wide avenues. I'm not sure. Like, I make the rooms so they just have the one door, but I'm not sure how I'm going to seal it all off for battle later. So I'm a little bit worried about that as well. But I have had the other surprising thing that happened was things that just happened kind of naturally. I mean, we were invaded by a bunch of raccoons at one point. I had a firefly die in a room. I think it was a firefly die in a room, and then its dead body created a miasma, which made a dwarf really unhappy because he slept in the miasma, which I'm like, dude, why'd you sleep in the miasma? Which was just these purple squares started appearing, and I was looking at them, and I'm using the inspect, which I think is K. You just kind of go and like look at individual places, and I'm looking at it, and it says it's a miasma, and I'm like, a miasma? What is a miasma? Like, what is that? Is there something I should be doing about this? And eventually it just went away. I also made a refuse store so that, far away from the entrance, so that maybe they would go dump, if there were dead bodies, they would go dump them there. No miasmas appear if the bodies are outdoors, as far as I can tell. So it's
wild.
It's really surprising, some of the things that it's doing, because it's deciding to create a miasma because there's not enough airflow, ? Like, what does that even mean? That a miasma can't build up because it just spread over several turns, or several whatever, several ticks. So it was, it was pretty astonishing to watch. I don't know how long the simulation has been running in terms of days, because they've only slept 3 times, as far as I can tell, maybe 4. So my sense of the scale of time is also severely off. Like, they've done an awful lot for sleeping 4 times. I've got all these buildings, and I've carved out all these rooms, and we've got all this stone piled up, and we've dressed some of the floor. There's a lot going on already, and I can kind of see how you get sucked into this game now. So, because I definitely last night was like, no, I really should go do something else now, because I have other things I have to do this weekend, and I wanted to spend more time on my fortress. So,
the other surprising thing to me that is delightful is the amount of world simulation they're doing, because they're, just to mention it for those who haven't played it, there's seasons. I had it turn to summer at one point. There's weather. I've had it rain multiple times. They sort of and also the visual representation that they've embraced, the river is actually flowing. They essentially animate the the glyphs in a direction so you can see the current, happening. At least in my region. And I'm thinking now that maybe if I'm in the middle, a bit more of a jungly kind of area, like I have swarms of flies kind of around. I haven't seen a raccoon at all. And if I look at the unit list, I see warthogs, and I think there's a one tiger nearby, which I think I love
Oh
that
no.
you can look at. Yeah, I know exactly. I'm hoping it's on the other side of the river, but I guess tigers can swim, but it's, and then also like the workshops, like the jeweler's workshop and the carpenter's workshop, they have iconography basically, right? And when the dwarf
Right.
goes up to use them, there's like little animations sort of that are playing when they're like using them. And so, which is important for a building sim game like this, because you want a quick glance, look at a thing and say, oh, that's that thing. So you don't have to like inspect it to see what it is. So it makes sense that they would do it. I guess I just didn't realize or expect them to be this representative of objects. So that's been a delightful thing. And then the last thing I'll mention, which I kind of knew about the game, but it's just nice to experience it, is the little like mini stories that pop up. I have a tame, you probably do as well, but I have a tamed feral cat, which those are oxymorons, I know, but I think they say it's a feral cat that is, in parentheses tamed. So I don't know why they say both. But anyway, this cat is wandering around, and I think it came with us on the wagon. And through, I won't call it, I guess I'll call it AI. I don't know if it's fair to call it AI, but the way it roams around, like it goes to our food stores and it sits there for a little while. It goes onto someone's bed and it sits there for a little while. I saw one dwarf seemingly chase it out of the fortress at one point and then come
Uh-huh.
back in. And so it's just like these little, it's just a lowercase c moving around the world, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
But I'm putting all of this extra, information onto what's happening and making these little stories, which, these sort of like emergent simulation based games have a lot of that happen often. So it's just nice to see it happening here. I even right before I finished today, this morning, I had a cave in inside my fortress.
Oh no.
Yeah, and people got buried, and my jeweler went unconscious, and it looked like maybe they cleaned it up pretty quickly, but they were like all sleeping, and then it caved in on them, and maybe they took damage. I actually should go look and see if they took any damage,
They
but
probably have some wounds.
yeah, and I was like,
You have to
because
be careful they don't have head wounds, because head wounds don't heal, man, and you can be dazed.
oh no, okay, great. Well, that's not good. But
If
it's
you
like,
have some extra empty beds, apparently they'll heal faster.
oh wow, interesting. Well, like I'm wondering now too, like can you prevent, or is there a way to prevent cave-ins, right? Like, did I build it in a way that
Mm.
is unstable? Because I was just, going about my business, and all of a sudden a big room in my fortress just like had all these new icons appear, just debris, and it was covering everything up, and I thought it was a bug or something. I was like, oh no, what's that? And then, I saw the message that said we had a major cave-in and people were
Oh my
unconscious.
goodness.
So
Oh boy. Well, I have that
yeah,
to look forward to.
good luck.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks. Now I'm terrified to dig deeper into the mountain, because I have not had anything like that happen, and I'm so worried about. I think it's Ilrel or Ilred, the very happy miner who just is always super thrilled. I had a dwarf who was unhappy, and that was the next person I gave a bed, because it was my one unhappy dwarf. So I've been trying to really manage that and keep an eye on those things. It is extremely entertaining. I mean, it has the appeal. It has the ant farm appeal, right? I mean, when you're a kid, to see the ants moving around and doing their work, it's hypnotic in that way. Although it's more active because of course you're also having to make decisions frequently about what they should be doing. I mean, it took me a long time to figure out that I had to tell my wood workshop what I wanted built,
Yeah.
et cetera. So it's been things like that have been pretty pretty surprising. And once I had that thing sitting there for a long time, like, why aren't they going to use it? I built this thing for them to do this, and I have wood, and I made a stockpile, and I need furniture. I need them to have beds because they're all sleeping in the dirt, and they're not happy about it. And when I finally was like, oh, I have to tell that thing to build build those, like, oh boy, so it's
these little,
I can see, I definitely see the appeal.
Yeah, there's these little discovery moments. Like the first time I realized how to build a stockpile and designate it what it is, and then you build the workshop, and then you realize you have to assign the workshop different things. And you look at the list of what the workshop can build, the carpenter's workshop, right? And it's just like, and those little discoveries of things where you realize how to do something is almost just as fun, as just seeing success. Also, the dwarves level up. It seems like,
yes, yeah.
So
they become better at things.
Yeah. So I clearly have to fool around with the job stuff and micromanage that a little bit more. What happened with the raccoon invasion? Like, what was the result of that?
They fought them off. The raccoons got to the wagon where the food stores were, and the dwarves came over and started. I started seeing that people were interrupted because they were in combat. You get there's little alerts that you get as things out of the ordinary happen. So in that case, I didn't know what they were. I'm like, pause the game, went and looked and saw what these things were, and they were raccoons, those little bandit jerks. I think they were probably trying to steal my food, and it was all extremely entertaining, I have to say. I also had a dwarf who was fishing a lot and would be fishing and then would have to stop fishing to kill turtles because the turtles would come up on the shore, and I went over there, and they're just like dead turtles all around this little lake that the dwarf had been fishing at. And just insanity, and I like, what made those come out? I don't know. I wasn't watching there, so I didn't even know that dwarf was that far away from the front gate of my area. So there's been definitely surprises like that of like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing that was going to happen. I built a well indoors, because they want well water instead of having to go out to the river. And my animals just started wandering in there. My horse and my mule were just hanging out in the room where I'd put the well for a long time until I made it a meeting room. And then I guess the dwarves chased them out because now they were, it's the surprising things that they will do that are really entertaining, as you pointed out with the cat, that you can sort of see things happening and you make little stories for yourself of what's going on. And that's, it is a really remarkable and interesting simulation, and it's so deep that I'm envisioning the great empire that is going to be these dwarves if they survive their first encounter with a superior force, because I haven't built any weapons or anything yet. So I'm very worried, that at some point that's going to become necessary. I did at one point turn somebody into a recruit to be a soldier, but I turned the back because it was a little opaque what I was doing. Like, invoke the something, some little, I should have written it down because it was like, do the cry of so and so. I was like, what is that? And I turned it on. It's like, okay, they're a recruit. I'm like, oh no, I don't need that. Nobody's attacking. But I'm going to have to worry about that at some point, having an army of dwarves to defend my stronghold, because it, after all, is a fortress. So,
yeah, yep, it's wild. It's wild.
It is wild. All right, I'm going to suggest we take a quick break, and then we'll come back and do a little feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. Want to make sure we get to some reviews and email. They've been piling up a little bit. And I want to apologize for anybody who, since the last time I said this, has sent mail to devgameclub@gmail.com and had it disappear and never be heard from again, because I sometimes just go for long periods without thinking to check the spam filter. And I don't know on what basis things get put there, because there's some things where I've definitely said, oh, this is spam, please don't contact me with this ever again. And then there's occasionally emails in there from you, the listener. So I apologize if in the past you've thought we were great big jerks because we didn't read your email or respond to it. It might have gone into there, and I apologize. And I did pull some out of there that we will catch up with, I think, this week, maybe. There was also a review in there from somebody who uses Podcast Addict, Camille. Apologies. It's hard to know how to pronounce your name. It says, hello, maybe this mail got lost in your cleanup frenzy. Nope, it was in spam. I am a professional level designer working for 10 years in the industry at a big French publisher. Your podcast is amazing and makes my weekly 5K run a lot more bearable. Over the years, I've learned a lot from your game analyses, which helped me to become a better designer myself. Please continue with your podcast and share your experience and wisdom. It is incredibly valuable for aspiring and seasoned game developers, which is super kind. Thank you, Camille, and apologies if I'm getting your name wrong. Tim is really the level designer here, so he's probably been the one that's been helpful.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. That's great feedback. Glad to hear that things we say are not complete nonsense, because it feels like that.
Oh, they're complete nonsense, but
most of the
time. So we've also got some emails we're trying to catch up on. Maybe next week we'll catch up on some more. But I sent you one, sir. I sent you a couple, actually, but read the first one.
Yep. Question from Brandon. I hope this email finds you well. Hi, Tim and Brett. A big fan of your work. I recently watched a video from another game designer where he was working on a sequel, and they were desperate to make it long because their previous games and its expansion were criticized for being much too short. This leads me to ask if the length of the game is something that is decided early on and kept to, or a liquid state that keeps changing volume as more ideas and content get added and or cut during development. Thanks, guys. Love the show. Yes.
Thank you, Brandon. Yes, games change their length during development. Absolutely. And obviously there's two flavors of that. Sometimes they get longer, sometimes they get shorter. I think it's more common in our experience, in the ones we've worked on together, for them to get shorter rather than longer, because I think that tends to be the case with especially the level-based games we did, early on, because levels get cut and your game just got shorter. And I'd say that that's a common experience. Nobody wants for it to happen, but it happens because of schedule realities often, or just personnel, like how many people you can throw at those problems. Those are my definite recollections from that end of the spectrum. And I'm sure you've had similar things happen, Tim.
Yeah, I think during development, I can't think of a game that I worked on that didn't get shorter, to be honest, during development. And I think, and especially like Brett said, it has a lot to do with the kinds of games that we have been working on. A lot of the times, at least together. But yeah, I don't know how. Elder Scrolls seems like a sort of a weird beast when it comes to
I was going to say that's
scope.
The other direction.
Yeah, but to his question though, I think it is common. So specifically, the example that he was talking about, what I do have experienced, the opposite side of that is, so while you're in development, basically your eyes are bigger than your stomach, right? And your original plans have X number of levels or X number of hours, etc. And then just through the course of development, you end up having to kind of scope down or what have you to ship on time or etc. or ship at quality. But to his point, after that game comes out, the next game, the sequel, if you are fortunate enough to be able to work on a sequel, there is always that debate, because inevitably especially a lot of the games that I've worked on, can also often get criticized for amount of content that they had. And so the sequel is often, bears the brunt of that, where people say, okay, well, how do we make the game bigger? And if you're looking I would assume if you're looking at a franchise like an Assassin's Creed or something that for a long time was an annual game, I mean, look how big those games are now from where they started.
Yeah.
And that is exactly a scope creep. I would call it problem. It's a scope creep problem. I think it depends on who you talk to, but I think that sort of, yeah, it's a double-edged sword. But yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it also depends on whether or not, how optional some of those activities feel. I mean, I think that's the case with the Elder Scrolls and Fallouts, the Bethesda games I've worked on, that there are often whole sections where, yeah, if you're not interested in this, you just don't have to do that, right? I mean, so the games do expand and expand and expand. Those games are definitely bigger. It's hard to say if they're bigger than planned. I think they tend up to have like more stuff in them than is planned, because the sort of size of the map and things like that, which does to some degree dictate how long the play experience might be. But those games are, they're just very, 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 very large, and they are as long as you want them to be. I mean, we played Morrowind on the cast, and my playthrough was maybe 3 or 4 times yours. And there's just so much stuff in them. So, and although they've gotten harder to expand in quite the same way, because they're not as just pure text-based, just having sort of production realities of later, the later you go in AAA game development, the more expensive it is to add content because of voice and what have you. But those games are definitely bigger than they sort of start out, because they just overstuff them. And I've been playing a lot more of Rogue Legacy 2, and that's another game we've discussed recently where it's like, it feels like it's, they said a lot of yes when they started playing, and it definitely feels like they were like, you know what, we can make this really big by adding this kind of system, and these sort of systemic games like that, where it's very replayable. The play length of this game to me right now feels like it could go on quite a long time. There are some things, there's this whole, I don't even know if you probably didn't go into this building, Tim, or you may not have even built it, but there's a building which basically lets you do expanding the game in different ways. There's a person you can talk to in there for your new game pluses. There's people in there you can talk to for your, what's the other thing you can do in there? You can basically change your skill tree, so you can actually expand it doesn't so much expand it as allow things to grow more. So something might start off being 10 slots that you can fill up, a bar that's 10 slots long, and then you pay and it's now 12 slots. And so that game just kind of, it feels like a 2 game that they're like, well, we can do a lot more with this for people who really want to play and play and play. Like, we have that for you. Skyrim even did that post-launch with we unlocked the skill tree so you could like level them all up 100% again. I forget what they called that, but you could just reset, and get, I don't know if you got the perks again, and maybe they doubled up the values. I don't remember how it worked. I didn't work on that part of the game. So yeah, it can go in both directions. For a point of comparison for us, our first game together, Star Wars Starfighter, started out as, I believe, 21 levels and shipped with 14. So we definitely were biting off more than we were able to chew with that game. And I don't remember if JSF was significantly longer. It was more involved in a lot of the missions. So, yeah, anyway, hope that answers the question. Great to hear from you. I'll do another one. Maybe we can get to all of the ones we have set aside for this week. Here's one from Murray Lorden. His subject is From Rogue to Diablo 2. He says, "Hi, Tim and Brett. I've been enjoying the Rogue episodes. Rogue always seems to bring up cool ideas, stories, and discussions. Impressive for such an old game. I think the developers hit on a lot of really cool ideas that set up fertile concepts for decades to come. Coincidentally, I just started playing Diablo 2 Resurrected on Switch, my first time playing Diablo 2. I think Diablo took some nice features from Rogue while still keeping the game fairly simple. As core elements, it takes the dungeon crawling, monster bashing, identify scrolls, etc. But it adds a nice single-player story through it and strips out many of the more complex or randomized elements of Rogue. And I cut out some details here from Murray's story just for time. But the gist is he came up against a particular boss who was very difficult and then did the following. So he says, I was going to have to go completely outside my normal go-to tactics and skills. So I spent a few hours leveling up and finding more gear so that I could build up enough dexterity to equip a more powerful crossbow I'd found. I figured I'd need to do more damage per second than the bow I used before. Learn a fire-based spell, which turned out not to be very useful in the end due to its short range and having to stand stationary while using it, and socketing a few specifically selected gems into some of my gear. I added fire damage to my crossbow and added poison resistance to two of my other items, reducing the effect of the poison that was causing me so much trouble. And I did beat Andariel on my next attempt, albeit just by the skin of my teeth. The act of developing that strategy and then taking all the steps to put it into action and then actually pulling it off was really fun and satisfying. While not all of the elements of my story can be attributed back to Rogue itself, there are many qualities and connections there. And even the sheer variety of different ways I could go about overcoming Andariel are a nice nod towards Rogue's approach of having many items that can be selected and combined in different ways to solve a problem. Just that feeling of agency and choice made the game feel really compelling and sticky as I'm making plans in my head and lining up things I want to do in the future and then working towards them step by step. It makes it feel personal, like my own choices and plans made all the difference to overcoming the challenge. Murray Lordran. So, thank you, Murray. Sorry to have to cut out some of that just for time. That I think is the one thing that's really different about Diablo, and later games in that sort of descendants, is that in Rogue it's very hard to make a plan other than just with the stuff you find going down. You can't grind, right? You can't. Yeah. I mean, you can grind, enemies, but I don't think you get new items in particular, right? They pick up things that are there, but they don't generate them when they spawn. They don't have stuff. So you kind of you have what you have, and that makes it difficult to make those sort of plans. It's more reactive planning, like, oh, I found this. How does it change my strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, I think we've talked about it in various series that that sort of combinatory approach is I think where games shine and some of my favorite stuff. So, and I think Diablo kind of from 1 to 2 and then 3, it's like they've constantly brought some of those extra layers, like the gems, which was a system that wasn't in 1. I don't believe it was in 1, and so to add those augmentations, and Rogue, Rogue is just what you get on that run. So it's like a whole different ball game.
Yeah. I mean, Rogue Legacy 2 sort of starts that way because you get whatever you have 3 people to pick from, and one of the things that's actually fun about how that game expands is that over time you basically gain more ability to control that in some degree. It's more to give more bites at the apple than to actually have control. Just like you can re-roll rooms where you get the goodies, and so you can try again, or push your luck and try to get something even better than the thing that you found. And so there's been different ways of trying to approach that. So it's certainly interesting. I really enjoy the ways that games have responded to those challenges and made them increase player agency in different sorts of ways. And but also I appreciate the games where you have to explore and understand what you've got and make the best of it, which is I think what Rogue really was after. So anyway, thanks for the email, Murray. Let's tackle the last one and then let you go.
Okay, subject is tabletop RPGs, pen and paper game design from Nick Miller. Hello, Nick. With Rogue being heavily inspired by tabletop RPGs of the 80s, and with all of the surfacing controversy surrounding Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, it leads me to wonder if either of you have any experience or opinions on game design for physical or paper-based formats. Both your love for D&D, tends to come up every once in a while and has always left me wondering how incredibly different game design is between the two formats. I mean, it completely cuts Brett's skill set out of the question. I have always found D&D, the Magic and Magic the Gathering to a lesser extent, to be interesting, as it almost needs a meta understanding of the game and its mechanics in order to function, whether it be building your own dungeon and world as a DM, or homebrewing your own character and content. D&D and other tabletop RPGs are just as much formats for games as they are games themselves. Even if you haven't designed a fully fledged card or board game, the games necessitate the players to take part in the building of the game. What do you guys think? Nick Miller.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, they they do take out, my professional skill set from the. I'd like to think I have other skills. My professional skills from the equation, at least with D&D. I've been running a campaign which is based on a campaign source book. A specific campaign, a specific series of adventures. But even there, I definitely find gaps in what it does, or the players have done things, and because of that, I want to respond more to that and develop certain NPCs more than have been before that are in the book. I mean, there's a character that my players interact with on the regular who is only in like the first 2 pages of the first adventure of the book, and I've been bringing that character back again and again because the characters seem to like that NPC. So it's things like that are. There's actually a couple of those. So certainly things like that, even in material that you're kind of running adventures that somebody else wrote, there's still an opportunity to customize further and react to the player. I mean, because we're the machines that are running the game. We have to leave a lot of room for individual creativity, both on the part of the game master and the player. Your thoughts, Tim? I'm sure something similar has happened in your setting.
Yeah, I mean, not having ever, obviously worked on any sort of tabletop game, it's really intriguing to me because I do assume that there are so many different design considerations where I would normally not have to worry about something or think about something, or would then have to think about something, differently. And so I don't know if I have I mean, with D&D specifically, you are, I mean, I guess I would sort of say there is design happening when you're building your own campaign, but it's also almost more of a storytelling in a way, or a sort of framework than because the game is like you said, the game is a format for playing. I think you said format or framework, or I'm trying to reread. Yeah. So it's like, it's the backdrop for it. And with card games like Magic or whatever, obviously it's more of just sort of what cards, what is your deck build and what. So it's sort of like those games do allow people to sort of dabble in game design without having to design the whole thing from scratch, which I do think is cool. But from scratch, like I haven't done it before, but I assume that the differences are so quite different. With D&D as an example, the rule set has to accommodate, as Brett was saying, we're the machines in that case, but the rule set has to accommodate so much more flexibility and variability for players to be, and DMs especially, to be able to adapt. But it also means you have to keep more in your head. And luckily, in the game that I run, both Brett and Joel, two of our players, help me out a lot as a DM, because I just can't keep everything in my head, or I'm just not, as storied in this particular edition or what have you. So there's a downside to that design, because it just means there's a lot of rules to keep track of. And I think a lot of the RPGs, tabletop RPGs that are simpler rules, tend to do well for a broader audience. But 5th edition definitely has simplified things. But I think about, in the Magic the Gathering example, being an old fan, but not playing Magic anymore, the physical card game. But I do play a lot of digital card games. And I still love the genre, and it's really interesting to see how the games are designed differently because one was physical and one is digital. I haven't played the digital versions of Magic the Gathering, so I assume that they really haven't changed too much there. It's just a digital representation. But for a game like Marvel Snap or Hearthstone that's built from the ground up as a digital game, how the game design changes. So yeah, I've been intrigued by the topic. I just haven't had the ability or the opportunity to do it from scratch.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when you start talking about the physical parts of the games, I largely think of D&D as like a non-physical game in some ways, right? Because it's a bunch of rules, and you don't actually especially the way we're playing, which is online, and everything's sort of digital. There's no scarcity questions and things like that. When you're talking about a physical card game versus a digital card game, that whole question of like having to actually buy separate decks in the sense of like literal physical cards, as in Magic, that's a big differentiator already. Like any scarcity in the digital game is artificial and by design. Whereas there's some implied scarcity in a physical game just because of needing to purchase those materials, even though there's also on top of that, and it's sort of designed scarcity with the sort of levels of rarity of the cards and things like that. I definitely remember in the alpha set that there was a rare land, in the sense it because of how they printed the cards, they had certain cards were rare by where they were placed on the sheets that they printed, and they ended up accidentally, I think it was an island was one of those cards, and you would get that card in your deck. Like that would be your guaranteed rare card or whatever it was. I think it was common, uncommon, and rare. And there were maybe 2 rare cards in a deck. Every deck had 2 rare cards, but in some decks, one of those quote unquote rare cards was an island. Which was just a mistake when they didn't think about it when they laid out that card. And so you'd get a deck and you'd be like, I didn't get 2 rare cards, I got 1. And actually you got 1 rare card and you got an island that was in the slot of a rare card on the card sheets that they printed. It's a whole total different ball game. And I remember how ticked a person would be if they got a deck of, because those things were like, I don't know, $9 a pack or something like that. And you'd be really, really irritated if you got 40 cards, but you only got 1 rare, and the other rare that you got was an island. Super annoying. So anyway, yeah, I haven't designed one of those either. We both played D&D a lot. And I've also played a lot of Magic back in the day, and not so much anymore. I don't actually play a lot of digital card games like you do, but I do find them interesting. Just there's only so many hours, so
that's for sure.
Thank you for your emails to devgameclub@gmail.com and for your review, Camille. You can, if we don't read your reviews on the air, it might be because we didn't see them. We see the Apple ones, but you can let us know if we can find them somewhere else. Other places you can find us are on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also sometimes find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
You are currently taking a little Twitch break while you're doing some travel, but you can be found there on twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end. I keep threatening to come back, but just don't seem to find the time. But if I do come back, I'll be there at Brett Duville. We also have a Discord. You can find a link on the Twitter. If you go there and poke me, I'll generate a new one if the other ones have expired. I sometimes put them in the show notes. I don't really know how to make one that sticks around long enough, because it seems like every link I put out there dies at some point. But come find us. It's a good little crew. We've got coming up on 100 people, I think now. We're around 85, which is remarkable. So thank you for joining, for all those folks. We don't really do much to administer it, though we do pop in frequently to say hello and talk with folks. It's a good crew, so you might have fun there. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, store, and our Discord with others are by Mark Garcia. Have fun carving your home out of the mountainside this week, and good night.
Good night.